Okay, R8. We're continuing with factoring, and we're going to be factoring completely. So in some of the questions, we may be factoring more than once. So first thing we're going to talk about is factoring when A is not 1, and A being our leading coefficient. So when the leading coefficient is not 1. So the number in front of the x squared is going to be a number and not just 1. So what we want to do when we factor something like this, we can't just look for factors of the last that add to the middle now, because that number out front throws us off. So when we factor, we want to start by multiplying the first times the last term. So it's 2 times negative 15, negative 30. Now we want to see what are 2 factors of negative 30 that add to our middle number. What's the number in front of the x here? 1. So what are 2 factors of negative 30 that add to 1? Six and 5, which one's negative? Negative 5. Perfect. So in my parentheses, I have x plus 6 and x minus 5. Now, because we started with multiplying that number out front, we have to do one extra step before we have our final answer. So since we started with multiplying, we have to end with dividing. So we divide both of our numbers by our leading coefficient. So we're going to divide them both by 2. If it divides, simplify. So it's 6 divided by 2. So x plus 3 is going to go into my first parentheses. If it doesn't divide, can I divide 5 by 2? No, we want to move it in front of the x. So then I have 2x minus 5. So this would be my answer. So you start by multiplying the first times the last, and then whatever your first number is, you have to go back in and divide by that number. So since we're multiplying in the beginning, we have to go back in and divide. How can we check our answer? You can FOIL, so you can always check your work by foiling. When you FOIL, you'll end up getting the original question. Sometimes you don't even need to FOIL out the whole thing. I would always recommend at least FOILing the first, so multiplying the first together. What's x times 2x? 2x squared, which gives us the first term there. So you can always check it, at least by multiplying the first, to make sure that you simplified correctly. So we are factoring when our leading coefficient is not 1. So we start by multiplying the first times the last. What is 2 times 3? 6. What are 2 factors of 6 that add to negative 5? Negative 2 and negative 3. Perfect. So in my parentheses, I have x minus 2 and x minus 3. What do I have to do next? I want to divide by 2. Since I started by multiplying that 2, I have to remember to divide my numbers by 2. Simplify the fractions if you can. So what's 2 divided by 2? Awesome. Our first parentheses is x minus 1. If we can't divide by 2, what do we do? Move it in front of the x. So what would our second parentheses be? 2x minus 3. Awesome. That would be our answer. All right, let's look at the next one. So our leading coefficient's not 1. What do we have to do first? Multiply the first times the last. What's 2 times negative 27? Negative 54. What are 2 factors of negative 54 that add to negative 3? Perfect. Negative 9 and positive 6. So in our parentheses, you have x minus 9 and x plus 6. What would I do next? Divide by 2. Don't forget, if you start by multiplying, we have to end with dividing. Can I divide 9 by 2? No. So what do I do with the 2? Move it in front of the x. So what would my first parentheses be? 2x minus 9. Can I divide 6 by 2? What would my second parentheses be? X plus 3. Perfect. That would be our answer. Let's look at the next page. First thing I should do. Multiply the first times the last. Since our leading coefficient is not 1, got to multiply the first times the last. So what's 8 times 18? 144. Perfect. If you don't know that, it's not one of your multiples that you can do on the top of your head, write it down. 8 times 8 is 64. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 6 would be 14, so 144. What are 2 factors of 144 that add to 51? Again, let's write down our factors of 144. We have 1 and 144. 2 and 72. 3 and 48. That one, perfect. 3 plus 48 gives us 51. So 3 and 48. So I write x plus 3 times x plus 48. Am I done? No. What do I have to do next? Divide by 8. Can I divide 3 by 8? Nope, so what do I do with the 8? Awesome. 8x plus 3. Can I divide 48 by 8? What do I get? X plus 6. Perfect. All right, let's look at the next. If our leading coefficient is negative, we have to be careful. So be careful when the leading coefficient is negative. But again, we're going to start by doing the same thing. Multiply our first times our last. What's negative 6 times 3? Negative 18. What are 2 factors of negative 18 that add to 17? (18) and negative 1. So our factors are going to be x plus 18 and x minus 1. What would we do next? Divide by negative 6. Can I divide 18 by negative 6? Negative 3. So this turns into x minus 3. Can I divide negative 1 by negative 6? Nope. So we're going to take our negative 6 and move it in front. So this would be negative 6x minus 1. Always, 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 when you start with a negative, double check your work by foiling, and at least if you're not going to foil it all out, just multiply the first just to make sure you get the same sign that you started with. What's x times negative 6x? Negative 6x squared. So same thing that we started with, which means we're most likely good. To guarantee that you are super good, you can FOIL out the whole thing. But this would be our answer. Next, we're going to be combining all types of factoring. So we may need to factor more than once. So things can be factored multiple times here. The first thing we always want to do, step 1, is check for the GCF. Always, always, always check and see if you have a GCF. If you can divide out your GCF and put it on the outside, it'll make the numbers on the inside smaller and make it easier to factor. So always check for GCF first. If we have 2 terms, check to see if they are the difference of squares. This says sum or difference of cubes, but we're not going to do that now. So check to see if they're the difference of 2 squares. If we have the difference of 2 squares, it factors into 2 parentheses. One has a plus, the other one has a minus. If we have 3 terms, Check and see if we have a perfect square trinomial. A perfect square trinomial factors into 1 parentheses squared. And if it's not a perfect square trinomial, then just try to factor it normally. And if you have 4 terms, you want to factor by grouping. So looking at number 1, what's the first thing we should always do in factoring? GCF. Do I have a GCF here? What is it? Do we have 12? 12 goes into both of them. We can divide them both by 12. And what are we left with when we take out a 12? X squared minus 4. Now, like we said, we may be able to factor more than once. Can I factor this anymore? What's special about x squared and 4? They're both perfect squares, so we have the difference of squares. Remember, difference of squares factors into a parentheses with a plus and one with a minus. So what's the square root of x squared? X. What's the square root of 4? 2. So what's going to go into our parentheses?
X minus 2 squared.
No.
X plus 2,
x minus 2. The order doesn't matter, so you could do minus first if you wanted to. And then don't forget about the GCF that you took out in the beginning. You need to make sure you put that in your answer. Don't forget to include your GCF. So here we factored twice. We factored out the GCF, and then we had the difference of squares. Let's look at number 2. What should we do first to factor number 2? Take out the GCF. What is our GCF? X. Let's divide out the x. When we divide out x, what are we left with? X squared minus 16. Can we factor this anymore? It's the difference of squares again. So what is the square root of x squared? And the square root of 16? 4. So what's going to go into my parentheses? X plus 4 and x minus 4. What am I missing from my answer? The x, my GCF that I took out in the beginning. All right, let's look at number 3. What can we do to factor here? The thing we learned today. Our leading coefficient is not 1, so we want to multiply the first times the last. So what's negative 9 times negative 1? Positive 9. What are 2 factors of 9 that add to 6? 3 and 3. So in our parentheses, we have x plus 3 and x plus 3. Am I done? What do I have to do next? Divide by negative 9. We have to be super, super careful when we're dividing by a negative. Remember when we said if we start with a negative, we have to be careful. Can I simplify 3 divided by negative 9? Yeah, what does our fraction simplify to? 1 over negative 3. So simplify it and then move your denominator in front. So what would our parentheses be here?
Negative 3 plus 1 squared.
Negative 3x plus 1. Let's do it separate. Again, we're simplifying this. What does 3 over negative 9 simplify to? 1 over negative 3. Let's move our negative 3 in front of the x. We have negative 3x plus 1. Now, when we FOIL this out, what's negative 3x times negative 3x? Positive 9x squared. Is that what we were looking for? No. We need it to be negative 9x squared. So when we simplify, so in our second fraction here, when we simplify, be careful with the signs. We're going to keep the negative on top with the 1 and move the positive 3. So I'm going to make it negative 1 over 3. Then the 3 is going to move in front, so it'll be 3x minus 1. Now when we FOIL it back out, we'll end up with our original question. So that's what I mean when I said be careful with the negative.
So when it doesn't turn out like the answer like that, you just switch the negative to the numerator.
Yeah, you can bring the negative up to the numerator and it stays there, and then just move the positive number.
You just able to do it. You just do it like whenever
You can, because this would be the certain circumstance when you have a negative out front. And the reason why is because like negative 1 over 3 is the same thing as saying like negative 1 over 3, which is the same thing as saying 1 over negative 3. These are all the same. It doesn't matter where you put the negative. So like when we simplified the negative just to be on the top. So you just have to be careful. Another way that we could do this question, because we don't like it when our leading coefficient's negative, so we could actually make it positive from the start. So I'm going to do this question again. Let's say we have negative 9x squared plus 6x minus 1. We don't like it when our leading coefficient's negative, so I'm going to take out a GCF of what do you think to make it positive? What would make this negative 9 positive? What could my GCF be? Negative 1. Let's take out a negative 1. And then I'm left with 9x squared minus 6x plus 1. Then we could factor it normally from here. You could multiply the first times the last and do the same thing, and you don't have to worry about where the negative goes in your answer. So we want the leading coefficient to be positive. So you can always just take out your GCF of negative 1 and change all the signs to make your leading coefficient positive. It'll just make the question easier to factor. All right, next page, let's look at number 4. For number 4, what do you notice about the question? What seems off about it? It's not in order. We're used to factoring where it's something like x squared plus x plus a number. So let's put it in standard form. So step 1 is we want to put it in standard form. Let's put it in order. So I'm going to start with negative 3x cubed plus 9x squared plus 12x. Now, what should we do first to factor? We could, but what's the first thing we always want to ask ourselves? GCF. Do we have a GCF here? What? Negative 3. Remember, we like it when our leading coefficient's positive, so let's take out a negative 3. Anything else I could take out? X. Negative 3x will be our GCF. So it's going to go on the outside. When I divide out negative 3x, what am I left with? X squared minus 3x minus 4. Perfect. Now let's see if we can factor any more. Do we have two factors of negative 4 that add to negative 3? It's not, because, like, if we checked and in the middle, we wouldn't get 2 times 2 times x. So it's not. So we just factor normally here because we don't have a number out front. What did we say two factors of negative 4 that add to negative 3 are? Negative 4 and 1. So in my parentheses, I have x minus 4 times x plus 1. What am I forgetting from my answer? Negative 3x, the GCF. So that would be our answer. So from here, we just factored normally because our leading coefficient is 1. We didn't have to multiply the first times the last because we took out the GCF, and we made factoring easier for us. We're going to skip number 5. And let's look at number 6 on the next page. 6, we have 4 terms. How do we factor? Grouping. Group the first two, group the second two. What's the GCF from our first group? X squared. So we take out an x squared, and what are we left with? 3x plus 1. Perfect. It's not 3x plus nothing. Remember, x squared divided by x squared turns into 1. Don't forget that 1 there. What's our GCF from the second group? Negative 9. Why negative 9? Because we wanted to make our signs positive. What do we have left when we take out a negative 9?
3x plus 1.
3x plus 1. Are the inside parentheses exactly the same now? Yes. So what's going to go in our first parentheses? 3x plus 1. What goes into our second parentheses? X squared minus 9. Can I factor this anymore? Bless you. Can I factor this anymore?
Yes.
Which part?
X squared minus 9.
What's special about x squared and 9? It is the difference of squares. So that means one parenthesis gets a plus and the other one gets a minus. So it's the square root of x squared. And the square root of 9. So what goes into our parentheses? X plus 3 and x minus 3. And then we can't forget about our other factor out front too. 3x plus 1. So that would be our answer. You have to do it. If you did it just up to here, you only factored it halfway. You only factored it once, but this question can be factored twice. So if the directions say factor completely, that kind of gives you a hint that you may have to factor more than once. So always check and see if you have another factor. Usually if it's 2, a binomial, it'll be perfect squares. So always check to see if it can be factored more. Let's look at 7. What should we do for 7? We technically have 2 terms here. Do these 2 terms have anything in common?
Yes.
What?
The inside of the parentheses.
The inside parentheses. So we're going to take out a GCF, and what's our GCF? What do they have in common? 2x minus 1. So our GCF here is 2x minus 1. So that's going to go on the outside. When we take out that 2x minus 1, we have 1 there, so it goes away. What are we left with? 4x, and here we have 2x minus 1s. So one of them is going away. And what are we left with? 2x minus 1. We're almost done with this one. What's the last little thing that we can do to simplify it a little bit? Combine like terms. What's 4x plus 2x? 6x minus 1. So we have 2x minus 1 from 6x minus 1. That would be our answer. So here we had a GCF that we took out.